We want to investigate a particular aspect that associates these parshios with Chanukah. So a couple of things that we want to connect over here. One, we'll see if we have time to present the idea from Rabbi Soloveitchik to explain a particular idea. But one is that we have the concept of habor reik ein bo mayim. When the brothers throw Yosef in the bore, in the pit, it says habor reik ein bo mayim. There is no there's nothing there. There's no water in it. Ein bo mayim. So Rashi says there's no water in it, but there are snakes and there are scorpions. So the question is, how do you see that? How do you see that in the actual pasuk itself? Habor reik ein bo mayim. So one of the commentaries, I'm trying to remember where I heard this. One of the commentaries explains the habor reik. You can easily say habor reik, that it's an empty bore. By the fact that it's saying ein bo mayim, it's teaching you that the bore is reik of mayim. The pit is empty of water. It's only empty of water, but it's not empty of other concepts that are in there. So the Vilna Gaon explains that this pasuk is a hint to that of a person's soul. The bore being the essence of the person, and mayim being the essence of Torah. When a person is reik of mayim, he doesn't have Torah in him. All he does have is nachashim and akravim. All he does have is snakes and scorpions that resides inside the person, which means that his whole essence is that of a death trap, if you will. There's nothing else that actually has life associated for the person in there. So this is one of the concepts that are presented in the parsha about the bore itself, is referring to the human being itself of having this story. The Gemara in Shabbos presents in a peculiar way how there's some sort of correlation. The Gemara mentions a correlation. This Gemara is what's mentioned over here about this empty pit. It's mentioned in the story of Chanukah, and it takes a sidebar to mention this whole story of Chanukah, and it mentions the depth of the pit itself. And there's a concept over here is that of Chanukah is the concept of persume nisa, that the menorah has to be a certain height. The reason why the menorah has to be a certain height is because you have to be mefarsem, you have to make the mitzvah explicit. So comment, what's the correlation? So the concept is the pit, when it's 10 tefachim down, it's clearly a pit, it's clearly a distinction. When you light your menorah, there's some sort of distinction here. Okay, so that's wonderful that there's some sort of connection of if your menorah is too high, it doesn't work. That's the key. If the menorah is too high. 10 tefachim is the lowest part, but if it's above esrim amma, then it's too high, right? So that's the question over here. The key for us is to be able to have mimafar same the nace. And that's one of the concepts the Gemara is telling us in this particular part of the parsha, that when the bore is empty, the pit is empty, there's no water, there's snakes and scorpions, that is a mifar sem hanes. That is part of the miracle itself. The miracle itself is that they're going to put Yosef in this pit, and you have to be able to recognize the mitzvah that's there. And that's part of what we have on Chanukah, is to be able to recognize the essence of the mitzvah that is associated with all the experiences that we have that go around us. We're going to quote you the idea that the Rabbi Soloveitchik presents. And this idea they have they put out some svarim they put svarim out many years ago called Noraos Harav that explains this idea. So we're just going to give you a brief synopsis of this concept, and the brief synopsis that he gives is the concept of what these stories are about. What is Vayeishev, Miketz, and Vayigash really about? At the end of the day, if you really want to study what the parsha is about, they're all about tshuva. It's the first recognition in the Torah that a person has the opportunity to do tshuva. Yosef is trying to convince the brothers to do this. And we see that through the brothers' sin, they go through things of public sin, and they go through aspects of what we call private sin. What is the concept of public sin? The public sin was that they sold Yosef together. It's one of the places where we learn the concept of minyan from, that there are 10 brothers together who are selling him. That's what we learn, that you have 10. And they did a public sin together. If a person does a public sin together, there needs to be a public achkaras achet, recognition of sin, and a public tshuva that needs to be done. And then there's a concept of private sin that's associated. When there's private sin, there has to be the aspect of private hakaras achet, recognition of sin, and a private level of tshuva. Where's the private sin? The private sin exists within Yehuda. Yehuda himself was convincing the brothers whether to sell Yosef, and he did not take the proper achrayus on a personal level, what he did not do. Therefore, he succumbed to sin right after that with Tamar, and he needs to go ahead and do a tshuva. So he does a tshuva, and he says she's more righteous than I at the end of the day when he's about to have her killed, and he does that private tshuva. But he still did not get the brothers to get to a level of public tshuva, and that is what Yosef's goal is. Yosef's goal is to get the people to a full level of tshuva. There's two types of tshuva. There's one type of tshuva that's called tshuvas hamishkal. Tshuvas hamishkal is an equal level of tshuva. What does that mean? It's pretty crazy. Tshuvas hamishkal, that the Rokeach presents a concept, that what that actually means, one more, right? Tshuvas hamishkal means that when a person does a sin, and when they do the sin that they performed, the enjoyment that you had of performing a sin has to be outweighed by the punishment in order to wipe away this essence of the sin. This is a heavy level of tshuva here. Which means if a person had a particular enjoyment from doing something prohibited, the tshuva that he has to do, according to some Rishonim, is tshuvas hamishkal. Tshuvas hamishkal means you need an exact equal playing field. Imagine the following. A person does a particular sin, then he comes to you, I feel terrible. I feel so cleansed, everything's great. So according to that view, you didn't do tshuvas hamishkal. Maybe Hashem forgave you to some extent, but the fact is, you still really enjoyed what you had, and the punishment that you got was not equal, and therefore you didn't even out the playing field from that which you've done wrong to that which you're supposed to. So the Rokeach presents the idea that there needs to be a concept of a tshuvas hamishkal. Other Rishonim say, no, it's not true. There is that aspect. They agree with the aspect of tshuvas hamishkal, but whenever you see tshuva presented, tshuva is presented in the name of Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, not in the name of Elokim. It's true that if tshuva was presented through the name of Elokim, then it would be tshuvas hamishkal. You did this, you get this exact punishment. Midah keneged midah. It would have to be measure for measure. That would have to be the even exchange. But when Hashem allows tshuva for the Jewish people, He allows it in the name of Yud Kei Vav Kei, which represents rachamim, which represents the concept of compassion, and therefore we have what's called the substitution. The substitution of tshuva means even though you did something so whatever, and you had tremendous pleasure from it, the resulting tshuva that you have to do may not necessarily have to be the full extent, because Hashem says, you know what? I'm not going to exact that punishment from you when you do tshuva. Again, think about this when it comes to tshuva. Tshuva really technically is a mitzvah given over to the Jewish people. It doesn't necessarily mean that the non-Jews can do a full tshuva the same way a Jew can do full tshuva. In order for a Jew to do full tshuva, he has the midah of rachman, compassion associated with him. That midah of compassion enables him to actually not have to have an even exchange for the pleasure that he had to the punishment. He can even have a lighter level of punishment in order to be that substitution. That's the concept of when you offer a korban. When you offer a korban, you did something wrong, you're offering a sacrifice, you're not killing yourself, you're not doing anything to yourself. That's the concept of the tshuva here. So says the Rav Soloveitchik, he explains this idea that this is the tshuva that is presented in these parshios over here. You might have thought that if you were doing tshuva, that it has to be a full tshuva. You put Yosef in prison for how many years? What was he in prison for? 12 years, 20 years, something like that? So now we're going to put Shimon in prison for 3 days. Right? We're going to take the brothers, hold them captive for a few days. We're teaching you the concept of tshuva of substitution, that it does not need a bona fide level of full replacement in the realm of tshuva. So this is what we're learning in these parshas over here. What we notice, good question on that?
When I read this week's parsha, there's a lot of references to the equality of that which Yehuda did to what happened to him. Like measure for measure, the same words are used.
Measure for measure, correct.
So that he lies to his father about what happened to him, and now he has to reveal the truth of what.
So I want to address that point. That point of the measure for measure, when you have over there, is not necessarily in the tshuva. It's the midah keneged midah. Hashem gives you measure for measure, so you can recognize that which you've done wrong. But when it comes to the actual punishment itself, there is a concept of tshuvas hamishkal, total equal. But as you see through the parsha, they don't actually go through it. At some point, there is an attempt to have a tshuvas hamishkal that is going to be full replaced. But at the end, they don't actually go this way. So he says, So are Jews capable of doing tshuva for all their consequences of a multitude of sins? The answer is Jews can only do tshuva through a symbolic realm of tshuva. It's not really feasible for us to get a full level of tshuva, that's tshuvas hamishkal, to the total replacement of that which we did, to the total enjoyment of that sin that I did. I'm going to have that punishment. It's going to equal that. Rather, he says, this was first revealed in the stories of Vayeishev and Miketz. At times God demands full payment, but at regular times Hashem says, I'll even allow a general sense of replacement, a substitution, if you will, not a full replacement. So he says, this is the correlation to Chanukah. He says, anyone who knows the story of Chanukah knows that following the Chashmonaim's victory that they had, the entire Knesset Yisrael underwent a vast transformation via their relationship with God and Torah. What happened was there were so many, whatever the numbers were, 40,000 religious Jews compared to I think the number was something around like 800,000. The number was enormous. It was multiples of this amount of people, along with the Hellenized Jews that were basically assimilated. So he said they had to go through a transformation. It wasn't enough that we won our battle. What we had to go through was transform the way the Jewish people are going to now, connect to religious observance. Prior to the victory, the relationship between God and the Jews was very tenuous. Hundreds of thousands of Jews became Hellenists to such an extent that they defiled the temple and the like. After the victory the Chashmonaim had, and after the miracle of the menorah, things changed drastically, and the Jews began to believe in Bechiras Yisrael. They began to be able to observe mitzvos in a way that was not before. The gzeros that Beis Din then put on, of the time, Beis Din put on many different decrees upon the Jewish people that related to arayos, intermarriage, were instituted in reaction to the large number of intermarriage and assimilation that existed. It's amazing. You're living through the Chanukah story now. There's all this assimilation that we're living through right now. They came up. We don't have the Beis Din to create those gzeros, but back then they created because they saw that there was so much intermarriage and assimilation. Intermarriage was so common that even Yoshua Kohen Gadol, we learned from the Gemara, we learned from the Navi, Yoshua Kohen Gadol, his children were intermarried. And he could not perform the service until he was able, that's what the prophet Zechariah says, he could not perform the service until his children were going to let go of their non-Jewish wives. So the Gemara explains that from the Navi that they had this intermarriage, and God said you have to remove this in order for you to be able to serve as a Kohen Gadol. So prior to the victory, many Jews refused to observe even the most basic mitzvos. It sounds like today. Even the most basic mitzvos. The Gemara relates that there was a guy who rode his horse on Shabbos. Chazal had to implement in order to put this person to death. The Beis Din of the Chashmonaim punished that person severely. The miracle of Chanukah changed the entire mood for the Jewish people. Eventually, Jews were able to abandon Hellenism for the most part and adhere to the Torah. It's for this reason that Chanukah is regarded as a great holiday. What was the concept over here? It's not so much, the presuming nisa that we have is not so much directed at the miracle of the candles, but to demonstrate the Jews' ability to return from the brink of total assimilation. That is the correlation. The Jewish people during the time of Yosef and the like, if you're going to be going down to Egypt, you run into the risk of total assimilation amongst the Jewish people. And because of the lack of love that the brothers actually had towards one another, that is what leads towards assimilation. When you have divisiveness amongst people, they separate, they move to different places, and that's what happens, the level of divisiveness actually happens over here. And so this was the process of tshuva the Jewish people had to go through, and it's a similar process that we have to go through Chanukah. It's a process of tshuva is really reaching out to Jews wherever we can to bring them back. But they were so far removed, they were so far Hellenized through the tshuva process, they were able to come back. So too through the tshuva process that the Jewish people, that the Bnei Yaakov had, that the 12 tribes had, that is what actually brought them together. So he says that is the correlation that we have with Chanukah in this concept. So number one, it's a concept of tshuva, and number two is a concept of Sheves Achim Gam Yachad, is really bringing the Jewish people together. So our goal is, through the study of Torah, through the study of mitzvos, is to really shine the light to other people and get them to come back through the observance of mitzvos, and that's a tshuva process that everybody has to do. That means a tshuva process for each one of us as well, in order to get that and experience the highest level of Chanukah.